Okay, this is like hot off the presses.
Hot off the press, and it's high. I'm like,
Yeah,
what
the
name?
hottest day of the year,
Yes,
hottest
very
topic.
hot.
It's
Hmm.
like Tim's on Coney Island, hot. Like we and like speaking of Tim's, the kings, the ambassadors of Tim's who experienced a huge split. We're talking about it on Unhinged today.
Yes, we're talking about this. Yes, absolutely. We're
So
going,
I
we're
mean,
going, we're going deep.
it's like I don't even understand half the theories that are going right now. I feel like we each have some insights. We each have maybe like a tip or two, a source or two, all that can be found with a quick Google. So we're not speculating, but it's just kind of unfolding in a crazy way, and
Mhm.
I feel like it deserves its own breakdown. So I'm Breez. I'm on Koku TV with Koku herself, and let's just jump right into it because I feel like the topics are still spinning, like they're still bubbling up as we speak.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm also Koku Puff. You may also know me as, and let's get into it. So, Drew, where do we go? Where do we begin?
I mean, so I'm hearing a name I've never. Here's the thing: when you start hearing names you haven't heard before that are associated with a brand, you already know shit is all bad. Like, so I'm
Hmm.
hearing the name Victor Lopez, who is the manager, right, of
Hmm.
Desus and Mero, and then that raises some questions for me too because it's like
Hmm.
which manager? Because like people have
Hmm.
like their business manager, people have agents, right?
Yeah.
They have lawyers. So and those people can either be the same person who has multiple skills
Hmm.
or one person to fit each of those roles. And I'm not sure who Victor Lopez is in all of this, but his name has come up and I feel like you can give some roundness to how his name is coming up because there's the manager theory.
Yeah. Well, so with the manager theory, what was curious to me is that apparently, if sources say, and what sources say is true, the manager is apparently banned from the set. And it's because
Right.
he was the language that was even used was weird. He was making people feel bad.
Hmm.
They were saying that, yeah, like making people, I don't know what that means. Is it
Yeah.
like he was insulting them? I think they were saying like yelling. I just don't know what that means. It could be any like
Right.
making people feel bad. Were they crying? I mean, I just don't know. But whatever that was, it was enough for him to be banned from the set. I can only think of some very, very few instances that would point to someone being banned from a set. And I find it highly unusual that a manager would be banned from a set.
Right.
I don't even know why a manager would want to be on the set.
I mean that like a lot of people have brought that up too, which is
Mhm.
like if you are in fact the manager, ain't there other shit you could be doing, right? Like
Managing.
yeah, let's like manage some shit. Like we got a lot to manage. We got egos to manage. We got
Yeah.
business and deals to manage. We got appearances and schedules to manage. There's a lot of managing that could go into your management. But I feel like maybe I don't know if like this is like the Dame Dash theory though, right? Because
Yeah.
he was getting Dame Dashy according to these reports. I mean, the Puck was the outlet that reported it. I am not familiar
Yeah.
with the Puck actually.
I'm not familiar with them either, but they said that they decided there were like five different sources seem to kind of agree with this manager
that was a
theory.
flex though to be like
Yeah,
five
exactly.
sources.
Five. We got five sources said, and all y'all got is us as a source that said. I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, that was a
The
little wild.
second hand of the second hand. Mm-hmm.
I mean, but also like it's like what level of Dame Dash is appropriate for the management of your business, right? Like there's a certain like on the come up level of Dame
Mm-hmm.
Dash that's like perfect for like getting you in the
Yeah.
door, right? Like for like, crowbarring you in to those rooms that you might not have access to before. And then it's like diminishing returns after you're in the room.
I mean, I have definitely been in work environments where they were informal, where HR was not even a concept. Where especially when you're working in this type of entertainment
Yes.
industry. I
Yes.
mean, you work with people who maybe they might be a vice president of something, and this is the first job that they've ever really had, in a
Yeah.
legal sense. So it's
Oh,
like
yeah.
they just don't have any concept of how things work or just how to even speak to people. They've never been told, but they've never even had like leadership courses. They just, they're
Right.
successful in their own right, but they don't know, they've never had to play the game in the same way that we have, which doesn't I mean, I don't know. Like, I don't know if there's a right or wrong in that. It's just a different way of doing things. So when you have someone, and again, I don't know this man, so I can't speak on his approach. But if it's something where maybe his approach just felt a little too familiar or aggressive, that kind of stuff, it doesn't really work with a lot of people's work style. Some people are activated and motivated by fear. I know personally, if somebody comes at me like crazy and I'm at a work environment, I'm gonna take it probably, because if the hierarchy is something where that may be my boss or could jeopardize my livelihood, I might deal with it because I know I'm getting paid. So it's kind of like, well, you know what? It's just a job.
Okay.
But then it's like, now what happens with, and that this is kind of me being tangential, but when you're in an environment like that, where you've reduced somebody where they're probably like, wow, this is my dream. I'm really getting to work with Desus and Mero. I'm writing or whatever it is. I'm a PA on set. This is just so exciting. I know I want to work in television. Then you've got this person with this caustic, abrasive personality that's making everything so bad. That could be the difference between a person feeling like, yo, one day I want to be a producer on a show, to be like, F that. I'm going back to banking and I'm going to start using my finance degree again. So it's like, these things really matter, you know?
They do. I mean, and like, I know you've been on a production before, lots of productions. I've been on a lot of productions, and like the utility of a manager is very low, right? Like, I feel like the talent management actually is the quietest voice in the room. And if not, that means something has gone wrong. But I want to give some attention and consideration to the fact that like making people feel bad is not like HR language. You know what I mean? Like, so it's like sources, you know, notwithstanding, like I'm like making people feel bad, bullying. Like, I feel like those need to be mapped out in incidents, especially if people are doing like journalistic reporting on it. Like, that doesn't seem like the most thorough, like, especially if the claim is that some of this was documented, right? And that like, and then the other claim that this manager theory like stacks up with is that Desus backed Showtime pushing out Victor Lopez, the manager. And it's like, you know, Victor's sort of appearance as a brown man notwithstanding, right? Like, he had the Justin Guarini look, you know, he had the Dykeman chic, you know what I mean? Like,
he did not come off to me like somebody that I would be like fearful of. And I don't mean that as an attack against his manhood or anything like that. But it just, I mean, I wouldn't have taken that seriously, because I always think about things in terms of like what would happen so-called in real life. Like, once I clock out of here, and that same energy, would that happen on the street? And I just feel like he doesn't come off as somebody that could have that energy towards me.
And like, that's exactly true. And I haven't heard specifically or expressly from the Black and Brown staffers. I know that Heaven Nagatu of Another Round was a really great and famous podcast. They got a little bit screwed over and had a legal situation with BuzzFeed to get the rights to that podcast. And it was like,
shout out to Heaven and Tracy.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying? It's like, but I haven't heard from Black and Brown staffers in specific, and that just doesn't sit right with me. You know what I mean? Like, even if there was behavior that on his part was abrasive or constitutes bullying or harassment, it's like, let's outline that. Like, let's make that like a specific claim, because that is what this manager theory of Desus being like, yo, I'm backing him, and Mero being like, I'm not. Like, it's all based on that one account of it. And I'm like, that seems a little bit informal, especially for the level of formality that it has to be for someone to be asked not to come to tapings.
Right. So let's think about this, because like you said, we have not heard anything from Black and Brown staffers or anything like that. No one's been particularly loud about this at all. It stands to like it at least it's curious to me. Is this something where it's like a syntax or colloquialisms or a translation of it's almost like, you know, you're reading somebody else's, like, it's almost like a patois, right? Where it's like, it might come off a certain way. You don't really understand. Like, if somebody from Atlanta starts talking to me, I might not necessarily understand if in the local dialect what that person is saying.
It might sound like you're talking to me crazy. You know what I'm saying?
Like, you're talking to me crazy, and it's just like, you know, it's kind of like, you know, they have that meme out there, like, you know, what's good? What's really good? What's good? You know, so it's like, it can mean so many ranges of things depending on who's saying it, how somebody's saying it. And maybe this person is really not as aggressive. That's just an idea. may not be so-called aggressive. Like if you know what they mean, or if you're from that particular world, he didn't mean it to the level, but someone that's not from that world may think that he's being very, very literal.
And
or
that's a theory, but
that's
there's
possible.
The sub theory within that theory is that it is a Dame Dash situation, and like somebody's being an asshole, somebody's overstepping their boundaries. They're trying to take what colloquial hood credibility they have and bring it into this space to kind of like, you know, puff out their chest, when that's not really the place or time for that type of positioning, for that type of energy. And I feel like if that's the case too, like that's corny, you know, like that's wild corny to come in and be like, oh, I'm flexing on writers and producers because I feel like I can.
Right. And it's also like, it's a set. This is not the street. You know what I'm saying? Like everybody has to kind of like, you know, I'm not saying you got to wear a suit to work. You know, a lot of us now in environments that we're at now, there's a lot of business casual stuff going on. And you can just come as you are. But there's definitely the languages that we have with our friends, and then there's languages that we have when we're at work, you know, depending on who we're talking to and, you know, what kind of conversation that it is. The people that I talk to in budgeting, entirely different lingo. Yes. Like we're talking about stuff in different. When I'm talking to people in tech, entirely different lingo. When I'm talking to people, when I'm just specifically talking about like day-to-day things, like as far as like operations, maybe it's just a little bit more casual, you know. But it you know, you have to sort of know. I mean, it's almost kind of like saying read the room, but you kind of have to know how to work and navigate within rooms. But I mean, and also just really ultimately, if somebody said that I was coming off mean to them, like, you know, you're bullying or whatever, I would have to ask them, you know, what is it that I'm doing that to you seems like I'm being mean? And my answer to that, once they tell me, is not going to be like, well, I didn't mean it like that. But that's not addressing the issue. That's actually being unnecessarily defensive. If for some reason I've offended you, I need to understand where we can meet a middle ground where I can understand what the offense is, understand how I'm coming off, how I'm being perceived. And there's some correction that can be done there too. That's not like, that's why like I always I think that's so fascinating, but so many people are always so obsessed with the idea of like winning that they don't think about just being decent. Like who cares about winning? Like how can we just be decent here? Like,
but like how much could he have been winning if he was on the set? Like to that original point, it's like if like who are your other clients? Like just that baseline, like who are your other clients? Like what are your other to-dos today? Like if a main part of your day involves being on set, that's a big question mark. Like that's like a huge question mark, because even with like top level talent I've experienced, there are no managers who are managing a production, or if they're managing a production, it's because they have some sort of like engineering or entertainment background, like so they're doing something that is involved in the creative part of a studio production. But it doesn't seem like that's the case here. So like, who are your other clients, bro? Like is this your way of showing your importance and like flexing your ego in the one space that you can?
I also wondered, and I wondered what you thought about this. Is it unusual that they have the same manager? Because to me, that's kind of almost like double dipping. I'd want to have a separate manager.
You know, I mean, here's the thing. Like, I definitely find that curious, right? Like, but at the same time, like, and we'll probably get to this in a later point. Like, I do see Desus and Mero as like an LLC, like as an entity,
right? That's
in and of themselves. And so, like, the entity of Desus and Mero absolutely should have one even team, right? Like one manager, one lawyer, but that doesn't bar them from each having their own of those people, right? And I think that's where things start to get tricky and like split down the middle, because it's like, okay, like, oh, that's my boy, but he's our manager, and now like when things go left, that's your boy, you know?
That's what I would think about. Like, honestly, that's exactly the position I'd be in. Like once we know this is your boy, and you've and not that, let's just say like I agree with the management, you know, I've seen all the work that he's done and I know he can get us to a certain place, then that's fine. But I would always keep it in the back of my head that his allegiance would be to you and not to me. So that's something that I would always think about, and it would inform my decisions in the future in terms of, or my expectations anyway. Because for me, nothing seems to ever really last forever. I mean, we all know that. So I would just manage my expectations, knowing that even initially, I was never intended to be your boy. You know, that's your boy.
Right. I mean, that kind of like, that really speaks to this next point about like lifestyles, right? And like goals and how those things may differ. And if that's not an early discussion, so there's the lifestyle theory, what we're calling lifestyle theory, and why they might have split down the middle because of just different lifestyles, right? And you could speak a little bit to this, like, because in certain inner circles, folks know each of them personally, and I feel like you just move different when you're like a single person versus a person who is married with children. Like, that's just like obviously a basic difference. But what other goal differences or lifestyle differences does it seem like they have that might have like precipitated a rift like this?
I feel like, with friends as we grow, especially with the way that they've chosen to live their lives, there's an inevitability there that things will come to just a point where it's like, what are we doing, or what do we want to do, even if you're doing it together.
Right.
Mero is married. He's established, and he's very open about this. He's a married, father of 4. He's a family man. He's quietly living, in the suburbs with his wife. He's got that kind of lifestyle.
Right.
Desus is the single guy. He's having a good time. He's just in a different phase of his life right now. Neither of their lifestyles are better than the other. It's just two different types of existences. However, what does that really mean? So let's just say that like somebody asks Desus to do a production in Vancouver for 4 months. He probably could just up and do it, right? But then somebody asks Mero to do it. I mean, it's like, what am I supposed to do? Like, just be FaceTiming my kids all the damn time? Or leave my wife and, how's everybody doing it? Like, there's just things you have to think about as a parent. And of course, because I don't have children, and I it's kind of funny, people sometimes reduce like the experience of someone who doesn't have children or who may be single.
I don't either. I mean,
yeah, exactly. It's just like, it's like,
as far as I know, right? Like,
no possibles.
3 and a possible.
Right. But I mean, it's like, those are things to think about, because there's things that Desus could do. Maybe Desus would get some deal that's so fantastic that would have him like moving to Germany for 3 years, and it's just like something that he just could not refuse.
Right.
And he would want to do that.
You have access to a different type of white girl. You know what I'm saying?
Like, exactly. You can get all the white girls that he wants.
You know what I'm saying? Like, you have access to, like, I was born on the base mixed race type of chicks too. Like, you have a lot of like, you get different options.
Take
right?
the Euro-rail and hit all the different countries. He could do what he wants.
Also, I mean, even in a career sense, in terms of like when you get like big marquee label projects, right? So if like Disney is hitting you up and Disney needs a turnaround on a Pixar script in a month, and you don't have any other commitments that would take over for that Disney bag, like, you can go get that Disney bag, right? And like that, like the specter of availability versus unavailability seem to be some part of the rift between them. And
I could imagine that.
I definitely think that's a part of it, especially because, like, I mean, in one of the clips that we saw, so Mero on his own appeared on Math Hoffa's podcast, Expert Opinion, I believe it's called. And and Mero spoke about their Obama interview in a way that I felt like was like high key shady, and like
I thought that was very strange how he approached that.
Real
like, I just thought that was
he threw subs at Desus, man. Some low, not even so low key homophobic subs via Barack Obama's commentary. And I'm like, why would you? What made you feel like that was the story to tell in that environment?
And that's a joke. Like, that joke is the kind of joke you tell while the person is in the room, and you kind of prep them to say, "Yo, I'm about to tell that Obama joke. Just get ready." Like, you would kind of let the person know, like, "Yo, I got you, but I gotta tell these people what happened with Obama, because that shit's funny as hell." But I would never tell that joke outside of that, because what's the end game? It just felt very, very weird.
I mean,
it did feel.
You could talk about what that interview was like, because I think you noticed these things and like kind of pointed out like what type of time he was on throughout that interview, and how it seemed a little bit like spin, like he was getting out early with a certain kind of media outlet for spin.
Well, first of all, Math Hoffa's platform is really, really big. So if you're going to tell a story like that, you're also talking to an audience that also watches Desus and Mero. Everybody, you know, he's on the correct platform to tell his story how he wants to tell his story. I will say this. I am the kind of person where I always pay attention to who hops into spin mode first and sort of plays, you know, like let me get ahead of this and tell it like it is, or how it should be told, or how it's supposed to be seen. So I never, you know, doesn't mean it's not right, or that, you know, there's something to necessarily, you know, ponder about, but I just pay attention, like, this is interesting, you know. And, you know, one of the things, this is what told me that, you know, again, right or wrong, good or bad, you know, whatever the case may be, what really stood out to me was when they were asking me about their relationship. They were like, you know, how they do, they have the clip where it's like, you know, how they came to be friends, Desus and Mero, like, you know, what's this about?
Right.
And the way he described Desus, like, he was kind of like, you know, like, get it, like when he talked about, when Mero talked about himself, is like, get it out the mud type, you know, like,
I was in the back of the bus,
you know, like, you know what I'm saying? I was just, like, it was like, you know, it was real, like, okay, it's like that, huh? Like, wow, I'm never coming back to the Bronx. No, but then the way he described Desus, I was like, he was like, yo, you know, he was just a computer geek, like, you know, wild, smart dude.
Yeah, he said he was an internet nigga.
Internet nigga. I'm just like, and I mean, I was kind of laughing to myself because I was like, yo, we all internet niggas. Like,
yeah, exactly. Like, we're all very much, like, you were an internet nigga. Like, I remember the Kid Mero's blog, victorylight.blogspot.com, where he was writing in all caps, like, because he was an internet nigga. Like, just because you write in all caps doesn't mean you're not an internet nigga. Like, you was, like, the people in Math Hoffa's panel were not internet niggas on that level. You know what I mean? They didn't have Twitter accounts at that time. In fact, Math Hoffa was a viral Twitter clip that was getting clowned and sort of like, you know, that's how he got his reputation. So I feel like, and that's because he was outside of it, right? Like, he didn't understand, hey, punching another rapper in the face during a battle is going to make me like a comedy legend in another way, in another part of the internet that I don't even understand or interact with. And Mero was very much part of that internet.
And it was just curious to me because it kind of seemed like little digs to sort of like undermine Desus's like credibility or even like manhood. And I just was thinking, like, what does this really mean? Like, why is this? You know, what are we doing here?
Even the Hollywood Desus stuff that would happen during the show, and like Reddit's been pretty active talking about it, but I went back and actually watched some of the episodes in season 4 because I actually hadn't caught up. I hadn't been watching them recently because I mean, I think I noticed that just something changed on Showtime. I wasn't as much.
I actually expected it to change, not necessarily because of their relationship. I just knew that the Showtime branding would bring about a change that had to happen at that level, especially on a premium cable network. So I was never surprised about that part. I just wondered how it was going to play out.
Right. And in the first episode of this current season, season 4, Desus mentions coming back from Iceland, which he posted on his socials. And then like Mero makes some, you know, like, I wouldn't call them underhanded, but definitely like some digs at Hollywood Desus, at the fact that Desus is in Iceland. And also, like, again, that 4 kids thing. It's like, can you really just pick up and like globetrot in the same way that your co-host
would you even want to?
Right. It's that part of your like vision board. You know what I mean? Like, I don't feel like that's on Mero's vision board at all, actually. You can't pick up and go to another country. You may not want to, but like, also, how does that look when you're kind of like making these like sneak disses toward someone who's doing that?
Right. And then it's also, how does it feel when you see somebody's out in Iceland, you are home, you're doing what you're, you know, so-called supposed to do. Oh, of course, supposed to do, really, you know, but you've seen this person globetrotting, and it's like it feels like maybe they're not prioritizing what's happening back home, but at the same time, like, you know, there has to be some kind of work-life balance as well. So, you know, I mean, I support that.
I mean, but also, like, if Desus came back from going to Iceland and then quickly had COVID, which he talks about on the show in season 4, he had COVID, so they had to take a break. So it's also like this fact of maybe there were rumblings about Mero being the less professional one, but you also like went to Iceland and got COVID and we had to take a week off of the show. So like, I could imagine that creating some resentment too. Like the impression that people have of me because of things that you've said, you know, to staffers, is that I'm not ready and I'm not available. But You actually are the one in this case that wasn't ready and wasn't available. And I feels like you get the raw end of that when you're Mero and people are kind of like rumoring that you might be, a little bit of a lush on the set or a little bit less serious about the progression of the brand, etc. And then and then you popping up because like you was just on the red eye, like catching flights, not feelings. And I know that would probably make me feel a type of way if the impression of me that you were spreading was that I wasn't available or I wasn't up to the professional standard.
I also feel like especially since it's interesting that Math Hoffa interview happened when it did, because what I felt like with this interview was it was almost like a resume or CV. He was like reminding us of like what he does or what he can do. I mean, he made it very, very specific to say he's behind the scenes. He does a lot of writing. He does all these different things. So it's like, I do think at some point it feels like maybe he feels, because if you feel like you have to say all that, maybe you feel underappreciated. So there's something there with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that kind of rolls really well into the fact that like when you are more available or when you lead the lifestyle of a single person, is it possible that maybe you're getting better looks? Like maybe like apart from the show, apart from the brand where you guys get to appear together, like people are seeking you out to be like, oh, this one, he can be good for this look.
Listen, I don't know anything about how they live their day-to-days or their personal lives, but I will say this. Think about it. Like it's even like, back in the day before like social media was even really big, people would have the Mero life, but have to hide their wives and children because they needed to appear single. It was just better for PR. Now we're obviously very much so out loud about our lives because everybody can relate to something. So there's always just that piece that like, Mero could be selling, he could be a spokesperson for Pampers, whereas Jesus can be a spokesperson for a liquor brand. And it would probably make more sense if he was like in the club, popping bottles or whatever the case. So yeah, I mean, I do think that makes a single person can be more bankable.
That's possible. But the other thing is like, I don't know. I keep coming back to the fact that their brand is not one of them. Like, it's just like, it doesn't really exist unless there are both of them and that they're these complementary yin yang parts. And I do feel like the influence of like commercialism and fame is a big like culprit here, is like a big phantom culprit, because it's like, even if you're getting other looks, like let's say you get other looks as Desus or Mero and they're fine, right? Like, when Mero was in Vampires in the Bronx, that Netflix, like kind of like a cutesy YA horror fantasy movie, that's a good look for him. That's not something they needed to do together for it to be a good look. And it doesn't necessarily clash with what they do, right? Like it doesn't, but I think if you are being availed of opportunities, and this is just my opinion on it, but if you're being availed of opportunities to like host a late night show, I do feel like that's a kind of like, this is a conflict of interest now, because if we're a duo and that's where we're making our stamp and you're getting a lot of like rumored buzz for taking over a late night outlet, I don't think that, unless I'm solidly along for the ride and in those talks and, have agreed to be a different role or a secondary role in that setup, that could feel like you kind of like crossing me, dog. Like,
so you feel like maybe potentially it could be that it wasn't an open enough conversation. Like, it's like you just spring this on me kind of thing. No, it could be that, right?
I think it could.
Or it just could be because television can be, I mean, these people, the way they talk to people, which could even lead to why the manager in the manager theory may have been talking like that. It could be like, look, we don't see it for you. We want him to do it. That's just it. I don't care what you think. I know you guys are doing, but like people talk like that. I've seen it myself. This person's too skinny. Oh, they're too. I don't think she's attractive enough. She can't play that role. Oh no, those two kissing together. He looks pretty good. She doesn't look. No, oh, she looks great. No, come on now. They look awkward.
But just as an observer,
like, these are people.
Like, that's true. That's very true. Like that can happen. But just as an observer, it's like, I didn't see Jesus as the performance one, right? Like I didn't see him as like, he's going to hold a performance or hosting role down by himself, because he was never the more outgoing one. He was always the more like buttoned up one. I guess there's always a look for a person who's like a so-called straight man in the duo. but
Yes.
I didn't see him as ultimately as like camera ready outside of the duo's existence, right? Like I think he kind of like warmed to the camera over the Vice stints, over that duration. He warmed to the camera, and that was a lot in part due to how he functioned with Mero. So I also feel like you have to be able to like, you know, see the forest for the trees, because it's like if someone, even if someone is like a little snaky in Hollywood coming at you like that, if you know your role and you know your lane, then maybe that's not as tempting an offer as if, you know, the alternative when you don't want that or you want to go off by yourself. Like that can definitely like influence how you look at people talking to you in that like, yeah, you'd be better off language.
Yeah, I unfortunately too, I just wonder, like, you know, did these fights get to the point where they just said things that, you know, they simply cannot take back? You know, where it's like maybe someone, you know, because a lot of times when people have an agenda, they will say some things that will just to take you out of whatever the situation is, you know. So maybe things were said that were just like, well, forget you, this and that, and like who knows what was said or why we're here. But I just think it's very much so like it does feel, especially when you look at the Reddit and like the ongoing conversation that has been had, people that also have been religiously watching every single episode of the show, there was a shift and a change, and you could almost tell the timeline when things were just no longer the same.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, it didn't help that there were statements on record like that. The clip you sent me with the theory for, and Desus is being interviewed on the Dan Le Batard show. First of all, I didn't know that Desus had done a separate interview on, like, even that, like the fact that they're doing separate interviews, just
you don't expect that. Yeah.
Right. Like, it's like, this is a duo act. This is Penn and Teller.
Yeah.
You know, like even if, you know, there's a different vibe to it, like it's a duo act. Like, so, and in entertainment, there have always been duo acts, and they have always appeared together. And usually it's probably like a brothers duo or sisters duo. Like there's some family relationship. But even if it's not, like the fact that, and Dan Le Batard specifically asked Desus about things that Mero does to annoy him. And and Dan Le Batard came in with information like, oh, I've heard from your staff, which was like, he didn't even give him wiggle room. He was like, nah, like this is gonna be saying this shit about you, like, or this is the type of shit that we hear is the conflict between you. And that was like, that was early on. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? So I feel like if that's the vibes and has been for a long time, I think there's a lot of authority to your theory that maybe there were things that were said that couldn't be taken back. And clearly there were some things that between them had started to differ. And it had to do with their lifestyle, but it also kind of had to do with their personalities, right? Like the strength of their alliance, like where, you know, what was the level of their friendship, and how they were managing that, like how they were managing whatever that business alliance / friendship and the blurriness between those two things.
And I mean, there's a lot of day in, day out, you know, this is your business partner and you're spending so much time with them. I mean, it's really, I would want some sort of balance or separation in terms of that. Like, and again, I mean, with my friends that are married with children, I don't hang with them as much as I do my friends that are also single or like don't have kids. You know, you just can't be hanging out at somebody's house and they got like 5 kids running around.
No, that's not different. It's not awkward. You know what I mean? It's like you just gotta go to bed. There's meal times. There's different structures you can't be a part of. Like just hanging with the homies. No, it's different. Well different. And like, I mean, also to make the relationship parallel, like, you know, they have the term the 7-year itch for a reason, right? Like a lot of relationships, like, you know, they just start not to feel as like important or as fitting in one phase of life as they do in another. And so, you know, maybe there's also some of that going on where the things that felt exciting and fresh and brand new and honeymoon period didn't feel that way when it's like, okay, we got a day in, day out, tape this show. It's kind of grueling. We have a lot of appearances. There's a lot of scheduling. There's a lot of like conflicts of interest. So I think that's part of it too. So tell me about this left behind theory and what you know that feeds your left behind theory on Desus and Mero.
So with the left behind theory, this kind of goes back to what we were talking about, and it kind of bleeds a little bit into the lifestyle theory, especially when we're talking about that hosting opportunity. There are a lot of people that believe, now where you say that Mero, from your interpretation, is more of the physical comedian and kind of just seems like a really good compliment to Desus, who seems a lot more reserved. But there are a lot of people that see it for Desus in a different capacity and that seem to want to either see him work separately or just differently.
So tell me about those people, or like that, like mindset, because I need to understand. Sources are telling me.
So source number 10B, no, I'm kidding. But so, some sources say, some people think that Desus is the more, let's say, the more naturally off the cuff funny. I've heard that. I'm like, in the reading, they think that Desus is a little bit more like just kind of just, some people think that Desus is like made for Hollywood. They want to see him in movies. They want to see him like do something outside of this. I don't know that I've ever asked or ever seen anyone ask him what if he wants that.
Right.
Yeah,
so I don't. Do you feel like this is like a people in his ear type of thing? Like
I think people are always in people's ears, and I think that a lot of times because people aren't used to either things having longevity, or they're, especially when you're talking about like sales and marketing and people that are just really, really super ambitious and just want to get to the bag. Right. They're always just sort of like trying to set up the next deal, the next situation.
Right. Have an exit strategy. It's a famous maxim in the entertainment industry and business, is have an exit strategy.
So I tell you what, even unbeknownst to them, when they were first having this kind of rift, there are people, probably execs on a higher level, that probably were having that conversation where they're kind of like Truman Show, looking down in and seeing the situation and like, because, a lot of times people don't realize that a lot of times we're all very predictable, things are this, there are patterns to things, and things just sort of happen the way that they do. It's
every band breaks up. Every band breaks up. You're not the first or the last. This argument has been had before. This conflict has been had before. There's always going to be like, these conversations have been had, whether or not anybody knows it or not. There's always going to be like, what happens? How can we brand this one? How can we brand this one? Where do you guys see it for him? Where do you guys see it for him? Can we put him here? Can we put him there? Do you think that, Desus could be the next Eddie Murphy or something like that? These are questions that maybe, and someone may even say something like that. So again, it's wild what happens in these rooms. Like, let's be very serious about that.
You got it. And I'm talking about, got the whiteboard and you're writing stuff down, right? But the thing about that too is that when those conversations are being had, again, think about how Mero was speaking about his accomplishments and how hard he's worked on what he's worked on. He described Desus as a smart internet nigga, right? That was like kind of his like, he was just an internet dude, just tweeting.
Right.
Mero described himself as a writer. Like, he just kind of ran down his television and his sort of his industry ties and the work he's done in that sense. So how would you feel if you felt like you had the credentials to move forward with something in the way that this could be a really great thing if they heard me or saw me, and then the person that just kind of showed up and said like, hey guys, so hey, what are we doing? Okay, I don't know what that means. I don't know that technical term.
That person is like ready to run with it.
And it's like that casual attitude, which is funny because usually that person is more casual about things, tends to usually kind of do very well, because that can be refreshing in an environment like that, where they're not sort of leading with like, and I did this and I did that. Sometimes that's kind of refreshing, like almost the naivete of it all, or just, the relatability to it, I should say.
I'd be tight though. I'd be super tight. Like
I think that
I'd be very tight,
I think, to be fair, if you are really to look at that side of it, if you are someone, if everything how Mero perceives it is the way that it is, then I can understand why that person would be frustrated. Like, damn, I put my all into this, and you guys are saying he's getting a Lamborghini deal now. Like, what's going on?
I mean, also, like, if we look at how Desus, even if we look at how they met and the platform that made them big, which is Twitter, I mean, Desus is a significant like account on Twitter, right? Like, when all these corporations and believe it, like these corporations, marketing companies, ad agencies, they're looking at those Black Twitter accounts that we see as like, oh, they did viral and funny posts, they were driving the conversation. They're looking at those people as major money makers, major like brand posts, like tentpole options to host shows, and like that. Those conversations I've been inside those too, where people are really getting scouted based on how their social media presence rings off. And like Deez's social media presence has always rang off way more than Mero's has. Like he's always been more frequently, right? Like he's just on it more. And I feel like that could be, to your behind the scenes theory, that could be indicative of someone's work ethic too. Like if they're more available and they also seem to be more present in this like constant churn content environment, like that can be more appealing if you're looking for someone to host something or to like show up day in and day out than someone who might have other obligations that they're tending to.
I think also what people don't realize is that when you understand social media on that level, like the way that Desus just kind of gets it, like another person who really gets it is like Lil Nas X. People that get social media like that on a high level, where they just really, really understand how to navigate, how to respond.
Yes.
That's if that was a job, that's a six-figure job. Oh, if that is a job, that is a six-figure job. Absolutely. Like a social media manager on that level, it's a nice bag. So having said that, those kinds of people, again, when they see that, they're starting to think about the bankability of the person and where else can we take this? Because we don't even have to manage his tweets. Like we've already got him doing that on his own. So let's talk about what else we can do and what brand deals we can do with. I mean, this is going to sound, I don't think this is a wild take, but this is a take that I have. I believe that Desus is primarily responsible with the direction of where brand Twitter went when they decided to go with that sort of funny slant and start talking like even like the Wendy's and, you know, hamburger helpers and
all
that's
that. That's not a wild theory. That's not a wild theory.
I believe if you're going to talk about like a top five, Desus is in the top 2 or 3 of why that went that direction. Absolutely.
Hugely so. Yeah. I mean, like when we talk about like, because like I like to bring up other examples, because like let's look at the read with Kid Fury and Crystals, right? And you know they had similar rumblings once they tried to make the things that they were doing bigger, when they tried to take their podcast into the visual medium. Like they had some rough transition moments as well, especially because that same thing happened with them, where it would come out in the show, like where you would hear the tension between them in a duo that's supposed to be, you know, entertaining you, making you feel good, surprising you, like just generally uplifting you. When there's tension there, you can tell. And those two are huge on Twitter, and Desus is more than both of them put together. Like his presence on Twitter is more than both of them put together. He moves the needle much, much more. So I definitely understand it from that aspect. Like, yeah, he's a really sharp mind, and he was able to turn a lot of that witticism that he put in, you know, 140, 280 characters into like other entertainment mediums, which is not easy to do. Like you saw with like Tracy and Heaven or with Kid Fury and Crystals, like it's not always going to translate to screen, and he was able to translate that to screen, you know, gradually over the course of 6-7 years.
I think what's interesting is that while Mero was sort of reducing the utility of him being that internet nigga or being the smart dude, that's kind of what gave Desus an edge in that sense, or what gives him this edge. Yeah, because he has that relatability where like he might be live out the cul-de-sac, you know, that's fine. You know what I'm saying? A lot of people, you know, it's all good. You know, I grew up, you know, in a detached house, and that's cool. You know I don't think that nothing wrong with that. But it's that ability to navigate, you know, that actually does make it where you understand how you're supposed to do certain things, and that gave him that window into certain things, where against that independence, understanding the internet, like from a back end, front end, and even just relationships and demographics way. Like when you have all of that and the edge of, you know, being outside, I mean, that's a nice combination. That's a nice package.
It is. I mean, would you say that this leads into the next theory, which is, you know, I made you, I basically raised you. Is Desus, in fact, the driving force behind Desus and Mero?
I think people just honestly, the way that I've seen it, and I think because the internet tends to, because I don't even really, like when I think about it, I'm not really sure if people, I don't know what people pay attention to. I know people definitely are watching the show. I know that they're also like, people are on Twitter all night long. Like people tweet all day long.
Yes.
So I don't know, like it depends on how a person is introduced to them. To your point, you find Mero to be the more expressive, illustrative of the two, right?
Yes.
But if your primary introduction to them was Twitter,
right,
that would feel like
it would. It's flipped over. It's definitely completely the opposite.
Over completely the opposite.
Yeah, that's very true. I didn't even think about it like that. That's mad true.
You see what I'm saying? So that would definitely inform who you so-called thought was funny. And a lot of people don't necessarily have time to sit down and watch a show, or they'll catch clips a little bit. And maybe, with that sort of, this person's my favorite or this person's my favorite, it informs how they're watching and what they're looking for.
I mean, you know what? That I feel like, wow, like the Desus made you, basically raised you theory. I feel like that's like rising in the ranks for me, because when I look at it, like how you just put it, it's like, how many mediums can you be funny on? Right? Like there are very few people who could be like, yo, I'm funny on a pod, I'm funny on Twitter, and I'm funny on TV on the highest level. You know what I mean? Like that's a very rare skill to say that, like, not only you can do that, and then when you look at it from like a entertainment production, like who's gonna get the bag factor, like knowing who will reliably be able to do that day in, day out. Like I do feel like Desus wins that award hands down.
I feel like it would come off like Desus, and here's what's I can understand, because I'm looking at this from like a corporate HR 9-to-5 perspective.
Of course.
This is one of the things that used to frustrate me about work, when people make assumptions about your life. I can almost bet you that there are situations where people are making decisions on behalf of Mero before even asking him what's important to him. So like when I use that Germany example, there's somebody in the boardroom, well, we can't have Mero in Germany because, his wife, they've got the kids, and
that's very true.
You don't know that Mero don't want to move to Germany with his wife and kids. You don't know that. True. Did you ask him? You're just making these assumptions. So I think that there's a lot of times, like, people just decide what you're supposed to do based on their perception of you, not realizing that, as I've said before, we're the sum of so many things. It's not really, that's not fair either. Like, you have to be direct. What do you guys want? Yeah. What do you want? And that's another thing too. Like, made you basically raised you is one thing, but it's also like, well, damn, we're here now. Are we even? I think so. Like right now, people see us as it's Desus and Mero. We're here. This is what we do. So it is weird. Like now, when people are looking at Math Hoffa, it's like you could look in the comments like, damn, I wish Desus was there, or it's like where Desus doing a thing. Where's Mero? Like people want to see them together, and because that's what you're used to seeing.
But it definitely, it makes it feel like that shit's very fragile if, a year of maybe passive aggression or a year of simmering conflict could take away 8 years of what you put together as a duo. Like that shows you that, there's maybe there were cracks in whatever was created at the start that just became much more, it's like what people say about money and alcohol. They don't change you, they just amplify the traits you already have. So I feel like money and fame amplified some things about them that maybe as the viewing audience, as outsiders, we may not have really given a lot of thought to start with.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely true. I actually hadn't thought about that. Like, how did they deal with, right now they are bona fide celebrities. That was not the case 8 years ago, whatever, when they were both like just on Twitter. Like they were popular. Right. People would have absolutely thought it was cool to meet them, but they weren't celebrities. Now, Desus and Mero probably aren't hopping on the train ever again, unless it's like for a promo for something.
That's magic. And like none of us can okay, this is a great thing for athletes too, because I want to ask you this question. I feel like you'd be really insightful answering. Is there any way to be famous and still self-aware?
Yes, I believe so.
I feel like it's so rare. I feel like it's so rare that people are famous in a way that like people recognize you at times and in places that you wouldn't expect. I feel like the accumulation of instances of people coming up to you like, oh, is gonna necessarily change your self-perception to the point where very, very few people will stay self-aware?
Okay, I'm gonna give you an example that I think. Somebody like Robert De Niro. Robert De
Okay.
Niro is probably worth like maybe like $500 million or something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Like he's just worth a lot of money, but Robert De Niro is the kind of person that probably, if let's just say we were in Tribeca, would, walk past him in the bodega, he's getting his bacon, egg, and cheese, and it's like he's super normal about it. Like it's just all in how you carry yourself and what you want out of fame. The Kardashians got a level of fame that they were seeking to have. There are other people that are children, that are heiresses and so forth, that are very low key. They weren't interested in fame. Actually, I remember even like with the Osbourne, there's one of the Osbourne kids that was never on fame.
Yeah.
She's like,
he's
a normal
from
life.
the first marriage, right? Like one of those kids, right?
Never wanted to be.
I definitely understand that. Like, but I think the difference that I'm pointing out is like, one, people who, because when you talk about heiresses and Osbournes and stuff like that, they were born into it, right?
Okay, I see what you're saying. Okay,
so someone who like an athlete or a Desus and Mero, where there's an inflection point where you become recognizable and famous in a way that you were not before, and maybe didn't even know consciously that you were seeking. And once that hits, and that hits very different. And I think the reason why I say it hits different is like when you have to be in a room where you honestly appraise what your ceiling is, maybe you feel like your ceiling is a little higher than what it is. And how do you even avoid the pitfalls? Like, we've seen what's happening with Kevin Durant right now. Kevin Durant was like, yo, I demand a trade. And the day that happened, the NBA was in a frenzy. Now, 2.5 weeks later, the market has died down. A lot of GMs, owners are like, well, actually, is this guy going to be happy if he's here? Well, actually, he's 34.
Yeah, like there's a lot of, yeah, man.
Like, are you able to honestly appraise what your value is when you're that famous and that good at what you do? And I think it's nearly impossible. I think, in fact, De Niro is the exception that proves the rule. He's a vast outlier. You know what I mean?
But then it's also like, when you're talking about the market and so forth, and I've been using that Kevin Durant example because I've said this, that's also a way of trying to like remind him of who he is. Like, to me, that was a power play on the league. That don't really have to do with Kevin Durant. That's more like, let me remind you something. You work here. We don't work for you. That's how that came off to me, because you cannot say, I know I always make excuses for Kevin Durant, but you cannot tell me that Kevin Durant is not an elite athlete. Like, that's not fair. Like, now I felt like they're playing mind games with him and they're trying to break him so they can put him in his place, so they can, again, have him reset.
Sure. There's definitely
confidence. So that's all. If that's what I would want Kevin Durant to be self-aware enough to know that's exactly what's happening.
I think he is. And I think it's also what's called a market correction, though. Like, and I think
that's correct.
I think both Desus and Mero are going to run smack into the wall of a market correction if they each overvalue themselves apart from the duo they've created. And
this is the problem. And this is the problem because now we've created an environment now that's so contentious, and especially it was such an unceremonious split. It's just like, ugh, why did it have to happen like this?
Yeah.
Couldn't we have been just a little bit like, I hate when people do this. Like, why couldn't it just like quietly just like split and let's just go and move on? Because really none of this is anybody's business in this sense.
We should have gotten the Kid Robot action figures. We should have had the movie franchise.
Absolutely. I'm looking for, like, I was expecting a buddy cop movie. Like, I just knew that was the next. I swear to you, I was like, oh, okay, they're gonna have their.
Key and Peele did one. You know what I mean? Like, Key and Peele got one off before they split.
But even with their split, and listen, we never know. Maybe the Key and Peele split may have even been something somewhat similar to this.
That's true. That could be.
I have no indication or any feeling or knowledge of anything like that happening because they didn't let it go down like that.
Yeah, that's very
interesting because now we can see them though as separate entities, and it has worked out very favorably in that sense. So the problem I was gonna speak to is that, like you said, you can sort of overvalue yourself or now you're starting to compete with somebody that you shouldn't be competing with. I mean, ultimately, especially with the kind of rise that you guys have together, that's your brother. That's your brother. So whether or not y'all are on good terms right now or not, like that, y'all shared a moment that nobody can take this away from you, and no one has experienced what you've experienced. So I hate to see something like this end on a bad note. But I also hate, like you said, I just think it's very interesting how you put that, because now that doesn't mean that, like, you know, Mero should go be in a movie as like a male stripper because he thinks he's gonna get the bag. As it's like, dude, that doesn't even fit your brand. Like, what are you doing? You know what I'm saying? So it's like, don't do anything that's outside of your of what we necessarily expect. Don't necessarily be predictable. Take risks. Do what you have to do, but do something that makes sense, because whatever happens now, if the play fails, the way people will pray for your downfall, my gosh. I ultimately want both of them to come out of this ahead in both instances. I don't want nobody to have to like suffer, or I don't like the I told you so's on anybody. I don't want nobody to be petty. I want them to both be successful, because it's gonna be
a 30 for 30 if it keeps going in this direction. Like, it's gonna be the mini doc that no one wants to happen, but everyone tunes in for, because it's the negativity, it's the downfall that happened that we were all expecting. So I mean, that's the other thing about the industry. It eats people alive, right? But I wonder too, and this kind of leads into the theory that we were talking about a little earlier today, how good of friends were they? Like, were they a construction before they entered the entertainment industry? And that is ultimately what proved their weakness.
Yes, so there's the industry plant theory. And with the industry plant theory, people don't ever think they were really ever friends at all. And they believe that this duo was put together because they just made sense. And it kind of feels like, with the dialogue that that Mero's been running with on his podcast rounds, I can believe that, you know. It does feel like, and which is fine, but it's like, why the story though? Like, why, what was wrong with the truth?
I don't know. I mean, I love the fact that, I don't know. There's two levels to it to me, where I'm like, Donnie Qua at Complex could put you together and you still formed a duo that created a genuine friendship that also happened to be perfect for your goals in entertainment and your needs in that realm. So I think there's like, it's a both things can be true kind of thing. But I also, the reason why I would still consider the industry plant theory is like, so what mechanisms did you guys put in place once someone paired you to protect the entity that you created together, protect yourselves individually? Like, that's why the industry plant theory is like, I really want to consider it carefully, because it's like, if they were in fact industry plants, and these were the type of dudes who entered into this relationship and this situation with each having headshots, you know, each having like some other kind of entertainment industry experience or representation, I would give a little bit more run to that theory. But I feel like it was very informal. Like, I feel like it was like, hey, someone who was a creative mind, like a high level creative mind, was like, yo, y'all work well together, you crack really great jokes on Twitter, like, let's see if we can translate this. And they were like, I bet, you know. And so it's like, they're planted in the sense that, they probably weren't as cool in high school as like the press release version of Desus and Mero that you're going around.
I feel like they could have known. I mean, there's plenty of people that we all went to high school with. It's like, oh yeah, I mean, I knew who that was. Sure. You know, pass them in the hallway, like, yeah, you know, didn't have any class with them, but I know him. Yeah. We ain't never had no beef. Like, it could be that. So it's like associates, not enemies, not necessarily friends, but you know, I know him. Yeah. From around the way kind of thing. Yeah. So that's a wild coincidence though, for that to be the case. But I guess actually what that must.
There's some age difference too between them, right? Like, that's part of what I've seen, is that that's like
part of what people have been saying. Yeah,
right. Because Desus was in Chris Hayes from MSNBC. He was in Chris Hayes's class at I believe DeWitt Clinton in the Bronx, and that would make him a certain age that is like slightly older than Mero, maybe like 3-ish, 4 years older than Mero. So that also kind of like makes people raise eyebrows. It's like, well, how cool could you have been if you weren't even in the same class? You didn't really pass each other. Like, y'all weren't mixing in the same circles. But you know, I do feel like the rhythm of their comedy and their jokes was kind of what made their friendship. If you know what I mean, like they had a vibe.
Yeah. And whoever decided to put them together, I mean, there's a lot of credit to give to that person because they saw that immediately and knew that it was going to work. And I mean, just to be honest, I mean, with many of the things that we've seen that have happened for a lot of people, this, with all the podcasts that we've seen implode and things like that, this was a much longer run than a lot of things that we've seen, even things that have been successful.
Yeah.
So you got to give credit to them that they were able to last that long and that they did develop something that was very, that they were friends at some point. You know, they were friends.
They had to have been. Like, I mean, I think about Jalen Rose and David Jacoby, who was basically, they were paired via Grantland when that launched, and they became friends through the same kind of creative, like, somebody, I think these two guys would go together well. And then they put together a 10-year run, right? Like, that's rare. To no matter how you formed your alliance, like, to be able to put together 8-10 years together is extremely rare, and it should be commended. And it's also why we all feel really disappointed that it has to end this way.
It is. It's funny when you said Jalen Rose, I was like, who wouldn't get along with Jalen Rose?
I know, right?
And I was like, well, yeah. I mean, Jalen Rose can kind of get there with almost anybody. Like he's another person that comes off as he seems like a pretty chill dude. You know, and he always gives. I love Jalen Rose's takes because they're always fair. Like Jalen will not let you call somebody a scrub. He'd be like, well, hold on now. It's in the NBA. Like he's not a scrub. Don't say that. Yeah, I love how he stands up.
I love that.
Yeah, I love that too. But I mean.
What do you think? Like, I feel like this podcast is like an unofficial petition to get Desus and Mero back together because they're not going to be anything bigger on their own. But also, like, it's like a eulogy. It's like a mourning of what has already come to be.
Well, I won't say that. I think that, you know, again, the powers that be, they've been doing this for a long time, right?
Yeah.
So they, again, there's certain things that are very, very predictable from their vantage point. Like they're decades into this shit and they're like, okay, you know, we've got another, you know, Bob and Joy. Oh, here we go again. You know what I mean? Like this thing is happening again. So they see the patterns. Like I said, they know what happens. These things are pretty predictable if you have that kind of insight. I believe that either of them, I mean, listen, I feel like, you know, Mero would be an excellent New York sports commentator. I think he would be great. I think he would be great calling like games, and I think, you know, I'd love to see him just like, you know, on Fox 5 or something like that. Like just, I think that Mero would just be a really good.
You said Fox 5. I feel like that's a demotion. That's a demotion, bro.
Well, I mean, what are you gonna do? Well, I mean, you already got all the smoke on Showtime. I'm just saying like local. I'm not trying to demote the guy. I'm trying to give you like true New York, like.
Yeah, I feel you on that. You know, I feel you. Like really be able to thrive at the level that he's on.
Yeah, like I think that's great. Like I mean, I think that they give you a kind of window into a New York that people don't know now. They're not used to it. Like if you haven't been in New York in like at least, I guess maybe 10 years, then there's a lot of even their dialogue that may not that you may not necessarily get, you know.
Yes.
So I mean, I just was throwing off because I've done Fox 5 because I was doing TMZ, so I'm not like
look, Fox 5 is ain't nothing to sneeze at. Fox 5 in New York, like that's a huge audience. Like no shade, but I'm also just like, is that us basically saying that you're local, like you're not a national star on your own.
Well, look, what is Mero saying? Because you know, he keeps, like, at least from what I saw in the Reddit comments, he's very, very focused on the Bodega Hive in a very different way, where it's like the comments were very much so focused in a sense where it's like, I want to see how else you guys want this to work if I can't work with him. Do you mind, you know, would you want to see, he's asking for feedback, like how can I grow the podcast without him? These are very direct questions. He's asking the Hive for feedback about that. And so I feel like that tells me he's married and tethered to New York in a different kind of way. So that would say that maybe, I mean, again, I didn't mean that in an offensive way. I was just thinking New York. Yeah. I was thinking more
that's
like
what he seems to want.
Yeah, like I mean, like it'd be kind of cool. You go to the park and like, Mero's at the game, like and just, calling plays and stuff like that. Like that'd be kind of
Yeah,
cool,
that would be kind of cool. I could
Yeah.
see him as that kind of correspondent, and then still also making it to the ESPN sideline or making it to like
That's
their halftime show segments as a special
that's what I
correspondent.
should have
Like,
said. That's what I should have
but
said.
those things still can they can intermarry, right? And he can still
Yeah.
be like very, very happy and very like very well compensated for that. I wonder, like, what's the Desus ceiling? What's him shooting for the moon versus like, oh, this is exactly where you should be? And like, is he clear on that? Are the powers that be clear on that? Like, what's his next play?
I think when they see, honestly, like I'm just trying to think like how the powers that be, I'm trying to think of how they see things. Like I think they see a fairly young guy in Hollywood, or in entertainment, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
Desus is is a handsome guy. He's tall. He's single. Girls like him. You know what I mean? So like, it's like, let's get him in acting classes and see what he can do on a sitcom. Let's do like, Desus and the Gang or something like that, and like give him a wife on the sitcom and see if he'll do something scripted. How would that work? Like they might be trying to like work a deal with him where it might be like some old school shit, like the Jamie Foxx show, like a traditional sitcom.
Wow.
Is he that kind of funny, or can we make him that kind of funny?
Wow. I mean, I feel like your sources. I'm not gonna put you out there. I feel like your sources, but even if you're not sources, I
have never been sourced to say a day in my life.
Greater comedians have struggled to get that kind of sitcom level presence consistently on network, on cable. Tracy Morgan comes to mind. Tracy Morgan had a great couple of shows.
That was a great show.
You know what I'm saying? Like his most recent joint was really great.
Yes.
And he had an earlier one on NBC. So he's had a couple runs, and like, I don't know, without the background in stand-up and performance on SNL, or like I could see him being a writer on SNL. Like I could very much see him being like, oh, I'm coming up with concepts. I'm here driving a new sort of lane on SNL, but like performing and then carrying a show and carrying a cast, that's very difficult. That's another tier.
We will see what happens with this guest hosting.
Right.
How comfortable how he fits into that role, and see how that is. But I just think that's how they think. I mean, look at Chris Rock's trajectory. Like he was just a little like wiry little kid, really. And then look at what he's become, I mean, it's just
he was a terrific performer though. Like I think
that's true too.
The thing about Chris Rock is like, let's never forget Pookie in New Jack City, right? Mm-hmm. Like even his recent turn in Fargo, like Chris Rock has some kind of pain performance chops that like that's earned. You know what I mean? That's like hardened, that's chiseled. And that's not to say that Desus could not have that, but I definitely see his ceiling more in the like, he's a really high level creative brain who could come up with sitcoms that work really, really well for maybe like a Drewski, right? Like, we're going to create this Drewski vehicle. We're HBO Max. We're putting all the money into it. Like that kind of person, like, why isn't he as big as Lil Dicky? Like, let's make Drewski as big as Lil Dicky and give him a show and a whole universe. And Desus being like the head writer, showrunner for something like that, as opposed to trying to make him the center of it.
Yeah, well, that's what I've always liked about. I mean, I know Nick Cannon has Wild 'N Out, but I feel like Nick Cannon has that kind of mind. He thinks of him from an executive producer standpoint.
Yes.
So I think that is very strong. Yeah, I like people who think like that.
I wonder, and again, it could be if he wants that, right? Like that's the ultimate question. Like, what does he want? It's not clear. Like you said, Mero jumped out quickly and ahead of it to say, hey, here are the things I want, or here is the feedback I'm seeking. With Desus, I'm seeing like the Hollywood Reporter rumors about a James Corden, him being floated as a name for James Corden's spot. I'm seeing him obviously do the Jimmy Kimmel opportunity, but like other than that, I'm not clear on what exactly he wants to do.
I don't know. Sources did not say.
The sources didn't inform you on that point. But look, I feel like this has been a really great breakdown of Desus and Mero. I hope that there's some there's something that can happen before it's a reunion, well after anyone cares. I'm hoping that they could find a way through this and sort of
I
like
hope so.
counsel through this conflict, because they were, like we said, they were an amazing comedy duo. They brought something to the mainstream,
something historic, something special, something we had never seen before. And it's sad to see it end in this way. If they had to separate, I wish it would have been just ended a little differently. This makes me sad.
I mean, if you had to go with any of these 6 theories, the manager theory, the lifestyle theory, the left behind theory, the I made you, basically raised you theory, the industry plant theory, what are you putting your chips on?
I think it's the mix between number 2 and number 3, lifestyle theory and the left behind theory.
I actually am gonna go completely with the left behind theory. I'm putting all my chips on the table because I do think the lifestyle thing is a part of it, but I think it's under that umbrella of left behind because I don't think those things become magnified until the opportunities are presented. And when those opportunities look good and they look really like lucrative and life-changing, that's when the left behind feeling sets in, that's when I think the lifestyles become very different and look very different to the 2 people.
And then ultimately, that's when ego gets involved. And when ego gets involved, it's never good.
Never good. Well, I'm so glad we got to talk about this. Another episode of Unhinged on the books, a very special episode. I hope y'all check it out.
Check it out, y'all. See you later.
Peace.
Thanks for checking out the Unhinged podcast with Koku Puff and Drew Breez. If you like what you see, make sure you like, subscribe, and ring that bell.